the abduction, the torture suffered by the child, and the bribes Jews gave to the sheriff, and more. Thomas's efforts to document this Jewish occult rite of an innocent child eventually resulted in the child becoming a saint. And he was remembered until modern times, until the Church no longer permitted such politically incorrect facts to be known. Thomas did a great service to the world in his efforts to eradicate child sacrifices by making known what had occurred on that dark, grisly day back in 1144. It put parents in England on alert, so they would know to take precautions to keep their children safe. Unfortunately, that was not the last such reported incident of Jewish ritual murder. Why would Jews continue to engage in such wicked crimes? Dr. Arnold Lees, who wrote a book about Jewish ritual murder in the early part of the 20th century in England, noted some interesting facts surrounding the ritual murders. A converted Jew called Theobald of Cambridge confessed that the Jews took blood once a year from a Christian child because they thought that only by so doing could they ever obtain their freedom and return to Palestine. And it was their custom to draw lots to decide whence the blood was to be supplied. The tragic murder that occurred to innocent William set a precedent. Because of Thomas of Monmouth's books that he wrote about the good child, others began to record these wicked deeds perpetrated by fanatical Jews. Some more of these reported victims follow. In 1243, in Kissingen, Bavaria, Jews were convicted by a court of law after having confessed to having used the blood of Gentiles for occult rites in their Jewish holiday of Passover. In the year 1255 in London, England, a young innocent Gentile by the name of Hugh was discovered to have been ritually murdered. His punctured body was found hidden on a Jew's property. After having reviewed the evidence, a court tried and convicted 18 prominent Jews of having committed the deed. The child was later canonized and became a saint. Altogether, before the Catholic Church became a bulwark for political correctness, there were over 20 children who had been ritually murdered by Jews and made into saints. In 1290 in Oxford, England, a Jew by the name of Isaac de Poulet was arrested for the ritual murder of a Gentile child. Perhaps this was the defining moment, as Jews were permanently banished from England a month later. Many of these Jews fled to Germany or other European cities. It was only after the King of England himself was murdered 4 centuries later by Lord Cromwell that Jews were allowed back there, although the edict officially remains in effect. In 1331 in Gubelin, Germany, it was said the Jews had murdered a Gentile child for occult rites. The Jews were found guilty and were punished harshly for this deed. They were burnt alive. In the year 1345 in Munich, Germany, Jews reportedly punctured a Gentile child by the name of Henry in more than 60 places, causing the innocent child to be bled dry. In Venice, Italy, in the year 1420, according to local records, Jews ritually murdered a child in a cruel fashion, and they were executed for this inhumane crime. In the year 1462, in the village of Rinn, Innsbruck, in Austria, Jews reportedly ritually murdered a child by the name of Andela on a large stone. The child became a celebrated saint. A church was built around the stone. The city even became known as Judenstein, or the Jew Stone. More recently, in 1997, Professor Robert Brandner of a theological college in Austria said this about ritual murders. He said, "Jews should apologize for their deplorable crimes against Catholic children like the holy martyr child Andela von Rinn, and against adults in the days before Easter, and for the blood of murdered Christians spilt by Jewish hands, which cries to heaven too." Jews became a little perturbed when the Pope met with Professor Brandner. In the year 1475 in Trent, Italy, Jews reportedly ritually murdered a child by the name of Simon. During the process, they also circumcised the child. This has also been the reported case in many other such incidents, although we don't believe it's necessarily a requirement during the bloodletting process. This child too had puncture marks over his entire body. The child was later made a saint.
St. Simon of Trent was murdered in 1475 in Trent, Italy, a beautiful Renaissance city of the era. He was taken off the street by cult members, much as pedophile killers do today. The poor little boy was offered candy and lured away, where he was murdered for the pre-Passover sacrifice to obtain the blood for the rituals. This was a very, very famous case of the era, resulted in the later canonization as a Christian martyr of young Simon. The case is referred to in the book Blood Ritual as a multi-adjudicated case, in that it went before more than one tribunal. The Jewish perpetrators had money and influence, so the case went on appeal, which was a very rare thing in those days. Multi-adjudicated, it went also before the Vatican, where the congregation that decides who becomes a saint examined the case in very, very thorough detail. Simon was canonized, regarded as one of the most popular child saints of Europe, until 1965, when the politically correct ones in the Catholic Church decided to decanonize him.
In the book Lives of the Saints, Father Alban Butler described the child as an infant martyr and describes the event surrounding his murder thus. The Jews in the city of Trent decided to vent their hate by slaying a Christian child for the coming Passover, and Tobias, one of their number, was deputed to entrap a victim. He found a bright, smiling boy named Simon playing outside his home with no one guarding him. Tobias patted the little fellow's cheek and coaxed him to take his hand. The boy, who was not 2 years old, did so, but he began to call and cry for his mother when he found himself being led from his home. Then Tobias silenced his grief and conducted him securely to his house. At midnight on Holy Thursday, the work of butchery began. They gagged his mouth. They held his arms in the form of a cross, while they pierced his tiny body with awls and bodkins in blasphemous mockery. After an hour's torture, the little martyr lifted his eyes to heaven and gave up his innocent soul. The Jews cast his body into the river, but their crime was discovered and punished, while the holy relics were enshrined in St. Peter's Church